I've been here for 16 years. The red sand I had become so accustomed to still sailed wistfully at my ankles, the shifting tides of wind dispersing it in intricate patterns. On the horizon, massive, jagged rocks pushed into the sky like forgotten gods reaching for the sky. And there was me, a dot similar to the sand on which I stood compared to the black expanse above me. When in the open on this planet, the sky seems to swallow you up, a tarmac black contrasting with the rusted red of the surface. I couldn't go back. The doors to my base slid open, a mechanical whirring coming from somewhere inside the walls. I trod through my now home, with each step a longing for my old life, a life where the floor didn't make a metallic dink with each step I took, where I could open the window to breath fresh air, where I could wrap my arms around the people I have a recollection of loving. There isn't love here. It was a Mars mission, successful at first. The cuts on my wrist now indicated it was unsuccessful, and to any outside viewer I would seem insane. In moments of clarity, I could see my madness, my scratching on the wall and bloodied, calloused fingertips, my clawing at my rough, dirty skin. Some hope held me here at arm's length, hope it could be normal again. I didn't really think it ever would be. I had been sent here September 14th, 1985, and judging from the tally I kept on the wall, it was the 10th of April 2011. Not that it made a difference. I had lost communication with any of the outside world 5 years after I arrived here, 1990. I have no idea what happened, but I remember that day. No more chatter over the radio to fill the silent void. No more jokes from the command center to keep me sane. I fell into a deep depression. They'd given me enough resources to last 50 years, given I used them properly and efficiently. Cans of beans, soup, fish, and fruit paired with crates of water and powdered milk were all I had to keep me going. My home is huge, with parts of it leading underground. This is where most of the food is stored. I have a bed, a bookshelf, a record player, and 3 sets of clothes I wear, alternating every day. I was just about to open my can of soup, the first food I'd eaten in 2 weeks. My frail fingers shook as I tried to pry the lid open precariously. Then it went dark. A shadow had been cast over my house. I immediately sprung up, dropping the can to the floor, and ran towards a window. I did not care if this was someone coming to rescue me, or a celestial god descending to smite me. Either way, I might finally be free. I listened. Word filled the silence, the sound of motors moving. I saw its shadow cast across the ground, its cosmic importance highlighted clearly by its massiveness. It had been a while since I had seen something massive compared to the landscape around me. The shadow was growing larger and larger rapidly. It was descending. I hastily rushed to put on my suit, and once I had connected my oxygen tank, opened the door of my home. Of course, there wasn't just one door, there was 3, each providing an increasing level of protection against the harsh environment of Mars. The door finally opened, and I rushed outside. Why did I look up? It stood just above me, hovering, looking down at me. It knew it was better, stronger, could do anything it wanted to me, but it just stood and stared. It was bigger than anything I had seen in the last decade and a half. It wasn't a living thing, though. It was a machine, a man-made machine. I noticed something hit the ground next to me, something like rain. I examined the spot it fell. It was a gooey, thick crimson liquid. It dripped beside me again, and again, and again. The thick matter sunk into its surroundings like something alive, the drops becoming chunks, the chunks becoming grotesque blobs. A shrill sound suddenly echoed around me, piercing my ears. I could not tell if the sound was genuinely loud, as my ears had been exposed to too much silence that even the most insignificant noise risked damaging them. I tried to cover my ears instinctively, but my sweaty palms pressed against the glass of my helmet. I once again looked up, and the thing was getting closer, the mysterious chunks now becoming as heavy as rainfall. The thing groaned and shrieked, its thick skin shivering like a cold animal. I scrambled to my feet and hastily took off, trying to run but moving more like a feather in a slight breeze. Another shriek and another groan, and I looked up again. It was now rapidly getting closer, gaining speed. Then it stopped there, hovering. I reached my base and went back inside. Splatters of that liquid were running down the windows, incrementally lurching further down them. Through them I could get a view of whatever it was that was outside. It was enormous. It was a hand, and I was a spider. So much was its enormity, and the fact it was directly above me, that I couldn't make out any shape. I could see, though, what some of its exterior looked like. It was from what I could tell, deep slate gray and made up of thick panels which covered the bottom. Some of the panels were coming loose, flapping like metallic feathers, and it was this that made me realize that something was wrong with this, what I had now deduced to be ship. It was failing. The panels moving were surely a sign of this. I was further enlightened to this when a thin sheet of metal cascaded down suddenly, slapping my roof and falling in front of the window which I was looking out of. Its engine rattled like a palpitating heart, stuttering with every other beat. I could hear its gears scraping against each other, grasping for one smooth breath. I could hear the screeching of the engines, much too human. Part 2 at A had been 3 days. It had drifted a considerable distance away from me now, but I still felt like a carcass in a desert, a vulture circling around my already rotting flesh. The fact it was further away now made it more horrifying as I could see it properly now. It was made entirely of a metal that now looked like tin and was an irregular, jagged prism shape, hardly aerodynamic. The liquid still dripped from it, heavier each hour, and along with the liquid, parts of the ship continued to fall off, bigger pieces falling each day. It had now gotten to the point where the debris on the ground now resembled the jagged rocks you may see adjacent to a cliff face. These were sharper. The noises it was making were getting louder, and the screeching from the engines I previously mentioned was getting exponentially more audible, more human-sounding. I had been watching it as I had for the last few days, sweating profusely and chewing my nails. As I was watching it, it lurched. Not something insignificant either, a huge lurch like a stag being shot in the heart. And then it came down. Just as suddenly as I am writing these words, it came down. I instinctively looked away, not wanting to watch what had become my captor fall, and not wanting to believe it was happening. There was a deafening whirring, and the screeching only got worse, and I looked back at the last moment to see it hit the ground. I mentioned earlier that it was a considerable distance away, but the shock wave that hit when it fell was still incredibly powerful. Luckily, though, the windows of my home were extraordinarily thick, and the walls reinforced, so no damage was caused. I can't say the same for the ground outside and sand around me, as it was thrown up, creating some sort of red-stained sandstorm around me. I waited for 10 agonizing minutes until the sand finally settled and I could look upon the wreckage. I was paralyzed for this time, the sand almost hypnotizing me as it circled round and round. I made the decision then that I was going to go and see what happened. The ship had crashed what seemed like a couple of miles away, and from what I could tell, it was about a mile long itself. I was going to make this journey. This would be the furthest distance I had ventured in my entire 26 years here, and without thinking, I strapped my suit on and made my way outside. Part 3 between me and the ship was hundreds of jagged rocks, the largest being 3 times my size. The sun-glazed land looked surprisingly beautiful as I treaded towards my objective, panting with each fatigued step. I'm not entirely sure what I was hoping to see, but at this point I was too far gone, too delirious. My visor had a thick layer of condensation on it from my breath, and I clicked the button to activate the fan on the inside of my helmet, clearing it away. When it had all cleared, I noticed something about 200 meters away from me, peeking behind one of the larger rocks that looked like a sort of stalactite. I squinted, trying to see what it was. It looked like a stump. Looking and moving closer, I realized what it was. A head. A human head. It was clear to me. Someone was here, watching me. I darted behind another rock next to me, panting and assessing my options. I thought back the old sci-fi films I used to watch, my biggest inspirations. In the films, the main course of action when encountering something unknown in space was to try and kill it. I figured that was a good idea. I moved towards the figure, screaming at the top of my lungs. "Who the F are you?" The sound of my own voice startled me, and I stopped, stumbling like I had been shot. The rock was now only 50 meters away from me, and the fear I felt in that moment made my heart beat out of my chest and reverberate loudly around my head. I stopped and looked around. For the first time, the vast expanse of the desert shocked me. I had to keep on moving. My heart was now palpitating so fast it was unbearable, and sweat dripped down my body, cascading down every inch of my skin. I moved slower and slower towards the rock, a contrast from my animalistic approach only seconds before. I reached the rock, whatever was attached to the head I had seen presumably behind it. It was bigger than I had originally thought, towering above me. Looking at the peak of it gave me an intense feeling of vertigo, and I instantly looked away. I put my hand on the coarse structure, trailing my fingertips along it as I walked around it. When I was almost at the place I had seen the head, I took a rapid step around the rock, expecting to see whoever it was that was scouting me, expecting a violent encounter. There it was. Nothing. Was I hallucinating? Had madness finally caught up to me fully? Was the ship I was so scared of even real, or was I walking towards something that didn't exist, a mind-forged mirage? I looked up at my surroundings. The smoke that the ship was emitting was billowing out from the top of a small mountain like a Martian volcano. That, to me, was confirmation that I wasn't seeing things. It was too late now to turn back, so I shook it off as symptoms of extreme anxiety and got back on track. An hour had passed by the time it came into view. The trip had been made longer by the mountain previously mentioned, and the terrain was rough and a nightmare to navigate, even for someone as experienced as I was. The ship was longer than I imagined, almost 3 times the size I had originally thought, and it laid horizontally relative to my base. It was detrimentally damaged, and every bit of metal was charred and frayed. It had created a long crater in the ground where it had dragged its underbelly upon impact, and dirt was piled along almost its entire length. It was at least a mile wide, the biggest thing I had ever seen. I think I was at the back, but it was so hard to tell as the damage it had sustained was too great to discern between parts. A huge gaping hole with wires fizzing and sparking around it had,